Hi everyone, my name is Karen, this is my channel RatherBeReading, and today I'm bringing to you my April wrap-up. April was a really great reading month. I got a lot of reading done. I took part in two really fun readathons, Owl's Magical Readathon and BookBuddyAthon. So let's jump straight in. I'm going to start off with my statistics, then we'll talk about the books that I read in the second half of the month, because I did do a mid-month wrap-up. So if you want to see all of the books that I read from the 1st through the 15th, check that video out. I will link it in the cards for you guys. And then we'll talk about the readathons and the challenges and what I checked off, what I didn't, whether I managed to complete the readathon. So as always, like I said, we'll start off with statistics. So in the month of April, I managed to read a total of 26 books. I also DNF'd a further book. So the 26 books that I finished were made up of 22 novels, 3 graphic novels, and 1 poem. I read 16 books in physical format. I read 5 ebooks, and I listened to 5 audiobooks. Excluding the audiobooks, I read 13 books that I owned and 8 from the library. I read a total of 6,699 pages, which averaged out to 223 pages per day. So a lot of the books that I was reading, I'm sure you can tell by that, were quite short. So even though I read 26 books, that's largely to do with the fact that a lot of the books that I happened to pick up this month were really short in length. So the shortest book that I read was actually only 4 pages, which was the poem, which feels like a total cheat, but it is what it is. And the longest book that I read was 464 pages. The highest star rating that I gave 2 books, 2 new to me books, 5 stars in April, which is amazing. I'm definitely having a better reading year so far this year in terms of 5-star ratings. However, the lowest star rating that I gave was I did give 3 different books 2 stars in April. So my average star rating for the month averaged out to 3.45 stars. So as I mentioned, we will now talk about all of the books in a little bit more detail that I read from the 16th through the 30th. I believe I read 12 books, and the first 14 were in the first half of the month. So let's jump straight in and talk about those books. So the first book I want to talk about is Watching You by Lisa Jewell. This is a book that I actually buddy read with my friend Michelle. This is a book that I had from NetGalley. It's an adult thriller. It's kind of hard to really explain what it's about. It's basically set in a small village in the UK, and you know at the beginning that someone has died, and you're trying to, I guess, figure out what's going on, and it's just about kind of the inhabitants that all live in this street. I guess is a very vague idea of what it's about. I actually quite enjoyed it. I've read a previous book by Lisa Jewell and had really enjoyed the writing, but had found that story incredibly predictable. But I liked the writing and the issues and things that she raised in that book. So in this one, I thought the thriller aspects of it were a lot better. I thought that she did a great job of creating this really great, really like unsettling vibe, like unsettled vibe, because everyone is kind of watching each other, everyone's spying on their neighbors, and it was just left me feeling very uncomfortable a lot of the time. So she did a really good job with that. All of the characters were really flawed, which I always really like. And it wasn't a perfect book. There were some, I guess, some parts of the mystery, but there were a couple of little elements and things that I didn't guess, which I always like. So I did really enjoy it. I thought it was a pretty solid thriller, and in the end, I gave that 4.25 stars. I then listened on audio to Boy Swallows Universe by Trent Dalton, which is narrated by Stig Weymouth. So this book is it's an Australian book by an Australian author. It is very popular in Australia. It's won a lot of awards here. I believe it was very recently published internationally in the US or the UK. I'm not sure if it was in both. So this is a literary fiction novel that follows a 12-year, I think he's 12, a 12-year-old boy growing up in the early 80s in a low socioeconomic area of northeast Queensland. And he lives a very non-conventional life. His parents are involved in some crime, have had a history of drug use. His babysitter and best friend is a convicted criminal. His brother is mute. There's just a lot of different aspects going on in his life. I didn't expect to love this book. A lot of really praised literary fiction, I feel like when I read it, I can enjoy some parts of it, but for the most part, a lot of it will go over my head. I loved this book. The writing is almost kind of crude in a way, but it was perfect for the voice. You were reading from a 12-year-old boy growing up in the early 80s. I loved the setting, the character's voice I really liked. I'm sorry if you can hear my cats fighting in the background. Well, not fighting, they're playing. I liked a lot of the themes that was talked about what makes someone a good person, and if you've done a bad thing, can you ever be a good person? There was a lot of stuff in there about that. I loved all of the relationships. And then the real kicker for this with me was that then when I was reading up about it after I finished the book, I realized that this is heavily based on the author's life. And reading about his relationship with his mother, like in real life, it was just, I thought this book was amazing. I really, really, really liked it, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. I then read What Lies Beneath by Clover Donovan / Richard Denny. Unfortunately, I didn't really like this book. This is a YA horror. It's quite short. I think, yeah, it's only about 170 pages. It's basically about a girl who wakes up in the hospital and discovers that her boyfriend has tried to murder her, and then there's some like spooky, supernaturally type stuff going on. I just didn't really like this book. I thought that the writing wasn't great. I thought it had potential, again, which what I mentioned with the previous Clover Donovan book that I read earlier in the month. It had potential, but I thought that the writing and the story were just incredibly underdeveloped. There is also a trans side character, which is good, but I don't think that the representation for that was great, speaking from a cisgender perspective, but I didn't think that was great either. So in the end, I only gave that one 2 stars. I then read The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. So this is one that I buddy read with Mel on recommendation from Michelle. She had recommended this as a book that she thought that I would really like. So this is quite a hyped thriller at the moment. It follows the story of this woman named Alicia who had a seemingly perfect marriage with her husband. However, one day, without warning, she shot her husband in the face like 5 times, and she then never spoke again, never spoke a word again, not to the police, not to her lawyers, not to anyone, and she has been in a psychiatric facility for several years. We're basically following her psychotherapist, who is now starting at the hospital and is treating her and trying to discover what's gone on. Why would Alicia do what she's done? This was really good. I don't think it was perfect, but the twists in here I thought were incredibly well crafted, and I guessed the twist, but only right kind of as it was happening, like literally 3 or 4 pages before it happened. I was like, wait, is this what's gonna happen? And then it was happening, and it was like really exciting and thrilling, like as I was reading it, which is what you want from a thriller, let's be honest. I also liked, there's kind of one main theme running through this that I can't really talk about without spoiling it, but like that all tied in at the end and everything, and I thought that was really cool. So I did think this was a really, really great thriller that I would recommend checking out if you're a fan of thrillers, because this is a really, really strong one, and I gave this 4.5 stars. I then read Awakening by Kate Tiernan. This is the 2nd book in this bind up and book 5 in the Sweep series overall. This is okay. So for those of you who don't know, this is a YA series about witches, and May follows a main character who kind of is discovering her witch heritage. This one was quite slow moving. It was my least favorite of the series to date. It was just very slow moving. There wasn't a lot happening. I can't really say too much about it, obviously, because it is so far into the series, but in the end, I gave that one 3 stars. Next, I read Ferris by Chanda Han. This is a 2nd book in a series. I think it's called the Unfortunate Fairy Tale series, which follows a main character who discovers that she is a descendant of the Brothers Grimm and that her family is cursed. And basically, they have to live out different fairy tales in order to, like, hundreds of different fairy tales. Some of them minor, some of them quite big and long and involved to, you know, live through. In order to break the curse on her family, which has been there obviously since the Brothers Grimm, and many of her family have died due to this curse and so on and so forth. I had read the 1st book, and while I didn't love it, I thought it was not well written and not a great book overall. There was something at the end of that book that quite intrigued me that made me want to carry on, and I thought I'd give the 2nd book a go. I really didn't enjoy this book. I liked it even less than the 1st one. I don't think the writing is great, but I think the main problem I have with the writing is that it's incredibly lazy. There's just so many like just things that happen that are just so like convenient to the plot and are just like lazily written in. And I didn't really like a lot of the character relationships and things that were happening in this one, and there just wasn't a lot that I liked about this one at all. So in the end, I ended up giving this one only 2 stars. Another series that I continued on with that I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it was that I read Paper Girls Volume 3. So this, I read the first volume and gave it 2.75 stars. I read the second volume and gave it 3 stars. So this is a YA sci-fi graphic novel series about a group of girls who on Halloween night in the 80s are delivering papers, like they're like on their paper route when some shit starts to go down. Basically, it kind of deals a bit with time travel. I won't get into too many details aside from that. This is the volume that made me go, okay, yes, I think I'm enjoying this. I think I'm going to continue. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. This is the volume where I decided to become a bit more connected to the characters and to the story, which is what I had previously been, I think, struggling with in the previous volumes. So like I said, I gave that 3.5 stars, and I will continue on with further books in the series. I then read Spellbound by Kate Tiernan, the final book in this binder, book 6 in the overall series. I liked this one a little bit more than I had liked the previous version. This one starts to get a little bit darker in tone, I thought, which I really enjoy because I do like my books dark. There was kind of a love triangle kind of introduced in this one, but it was all kind of resolved very quickly. It's not drawn out or anything like that, and I thought for YA published in the early 2000s, it was rare to see. So I enjoyed this one. I've enjoyed this series generally so far, and I ended up giving that one 3.5 stars. I then read Too Close by Natalie Daniels. This is another thriller that I had from NetGalley. This one is about 2 women who children meet like on the playground and they forge this really close friendship. One of the women is in a female-female marriage, which I really appreciated because I don't think you see a lot of that in thrillers. And it basically follows that one of the characters is going through a divorce, and when she's going through that divorce, she starts to rely heavily on the friend, and one of the friends has then woken up in a mental health facility and been told that she's done something really awful. And it's basically about that story, trying to discover what she's done. We flash back to, you know, their friendship and what happened between them and where the strain started to happen and all of that. This was not a thriller. It's advertised as a thriller, so for me this is one of those books where I think that the marketing of it is just not doing it any favors because it's marketed as a thriller. There is no thriller to this. There is no mystery. It is just a dark, like, family drama, I guess you would say. The author is not attempting to shock you or twist you, and I guess there is technically a mystery, but you get most of the details of the mystery very early on in the story, and then you're just more kind of finding out why, I guess, or like what happened to cause it. But like, it's not any great mystery. You kind of know exactly what's happening as it goes on. I don't know if that's the intention, but to me it wasn't thrilling at all. I did like I said, that it had the lesbian or bisexual characters or whatever. I also liked that this dealt heavily with female friendship because that's one of my favorite things to read about in books. I always appreciate when that's in there. But yeah, I think just the fact that I was expecting this to be really thrilling and then it wasn't, like, really let me down. So it wasn't a bad book by any means, but it just kind of wasn't what I expected going in. And in the end, I gave that 3 stars. I then read Asking for It by Louise O'Neill. So huge trigger warnings in this for rape and sexual assault, suicide, self-harm, things of that nature. This is about a female character named Emma who is out at a party and has been drinking and is gang raped by a group of boys. There are then photos of that event posted on Facebook, and it's all about that and how it affects her life and whether she was asking for it, basically, is the crux of the plot. So the first half of the book is kind of almost leading up, and you might think that isn't that one of my pet peeves, because one of my pet peeves is when you know something in the synopsis and then it doesn't happen till halfway through, which is kind of what happens with this, but it's done purposely in that the first half of the book we're building up Emma as a character and who she is before this event happens. And then we have the event and then who she is as a person following on from that. This was incredibly difficult to read but an incredibly important read. I've never been angrier reading a book, but that's what the book is trying to do. Emma is an incredibly unlikable character, and I think that that was a brilliant choice by Louise O'Neill, because it would have been very easy to try write this story and write a really like happy, nice girl who something awful happened to, which obviously that happens, but I thought it was a brave choice to pick a very, very unlikable character, a character that you're probably not going to like. I didn't like her. I wouldn't want to be friends with her. And then to have this situation, and then, you know, you still have to realize that this is not okay. Just because she's an awful person maybe doesn't mean that this situation is okay. I thought it was a really, really brave choice. The ending is not one that most people are going to like. It's not, I don't know, I don't want to spoil anything, but I just don't think that a lot of people, but I thought that that is the purpose. This ending was done very purposefully. I understand why it ended this way. I thought it was a great statement that Louise O'Neill was making. I thought this book was incredibly brilliant, incredibly difficult, incredibly anger producing feelings, but I really, really thought this was such an important book that I think like everyone who can handle the subject matter of this, because it is incredibly difficult to read, should read this. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. So following on from that is when I DNF'd my book in the month. So that was The Deeper the Water, The Uglier the Fish by Katja Apakaina. So I actually tried to read this book twice in the month. I had it on audio, and right before I was on leave for 10 days in April, and I only listen to audiobooks while I'm at work, so I'd listened to a portion of this right before I went on leave, and then I couldn't concentrate on it and I wasn't getting into it, and I thought I'm just going to leave it and I'll restart it when I come back from leave. So that's what I did. So I'd listened to about 30%, I think, before I went on leave, and I went back and I re-listened to that entire 30%, and I actually listened to 61% of the book this time before I decided to DNF it. This is again, I guess you would describe this as literary fiction. Trigger warnings in this for suicide and mental health issues. It follows 2 teenage sisters, one who's 16, one who's 14, whose mother has recently attempted suicide, and she is now in a mental health facility. And they are have been forced to move to New York, from Louisiana to New York, to live with their estranged father while their mother is recovering. They haven't seen their father since they were young children, and they have a very strange relationship with him, obviously. And I guess it's mainly trying to show the different ways that these characters deal with what happened to their mother, which I think could have been incredibly interesting and incredibly powerful. I really didn't like this book. We've got so many different perspectives. We don't just get the 2 sisters, we get some from the dad, some from characters who you're not even really sure what they have to do with the story, really. And I'm sure it's going to become more evident later on, but we were just jumping around to so many different characters and different time periods. The main part of the story with the sisters, with the father in New York, is set in I think it's 97, but we also get some of the time period when the parents met and their relationship. And we also get from like a present day voice, like talking about kind of looking back on what happened, kind of. So it was a lot of jumping around. Wasn't enjoying any of that. I also wasn't enjoying a lot of the subject matter that was in there. I don't want to get into any spoilery territory, but there was a lot of, one thing I could talk about that's not really a spoiler is that the mother and father's relationship, the father and the mother met when the mother was 9, and the father was in his, I believe, late 20s, and he started a correspondence with her. He was a friend of her father. They then started writing letters to each other, and then got married when she was like 17 and he was in his 30s. That already made me incredibly uncomfortable, and then I could see that we were heading down the path of another very uncomfortable theme that I just wasn't into reading about, because I wasn't enjoying the story already. So I just decided, didn't want to continue with that, and I ended up DNFing that book. The next book that I read was Smokin' 17 by Jana Ivanovic. This is the 17th book in the Stephanie Plum series. Stephanie Plum series is a chick lit series that follows Stephanie Plum, who is a bounty hunter, but she's kind of an inept bounty hunter. She gets into a lot of shenanigans and a lot of comical situations. It's supposed to be a very fun, light-hearted type of series. This series does have an incredibly long and drawn-out love triangle, and so that's really why I've continued on with this series, because I need to know who she's going to end up with. I very strongly fall on one side of the love triangle, and so I need to know what's going to happen. And I just keep reading, hoping that the next book I'm going to find out what the decision is, but I don't know, because I think now the series is up to like 25 or 26 books in total. So we'll see. I enjoyed this one. It's very heavily focused on the love triangle, but it's always enjoyable, but nothing amazing. I gave it 3 stars. Then the final book that I read in the month was another graphic novel, and that was The Woods Volume 1 by James Tiny and the Fourth and Michael Dialanis. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. This is a sci-fi graphic novel about a high school. Basically there's like 500 students and 60 staff or something who are basically transported to another planet into like this wooded area, and they don't really know what the heck is going on, and neither do you as the reader. I enjoyed this for the most part. A lot of this was just really set up for the future series. I enjoyed it for the most part. The art is okay, not my favorite, but I enjoyed it enough. I will probably continue on and see kind of where it's headed. I didn't love it, but it was enjoyable enough, and I gave that 3 stars. So now to quickly touch on the readathons, I'm going to try to go through this really quickly because I don't want this video to be super long, and I feel like it's probably going to be. So as I mentioned, I participated in 2 readathons in April. First off was BookBuddyAthon. BookBuddyAthon this year was based on a bingo board. The idea is that you buddy up with someone, and then some of the challenges are buddy themed. I will put my bingo board here, my completed bingo board, for you to see how I did. As you can see, I completed every challenge for this readathon. I was really, really happy with it. So we'll quickly go through the challenges, and I'll let you know which books I read that filled those prompts. So the first prompt was 90210, to read a book with a number in the title. For that, I read Smokin' 17 by Janet Ivanovich. Next prompt was Dawson's Creek, to read a book with over 400 pages. For that, I read Boy Swallows Universe by Trent Dalton. New Girl and New to You, author or book. For that, I read Book of Shadows by Kate Tiernan. Post your TBR on social media. I did that. I posted on YouTube, and I posted the link on my Twitter. Pretty Little Liars, to read a thriller / book with dark themes. For that, I read Too Close by Natalie Daniels. Read for an hour in one go. I did that as well. Gilmore Girls, a book off the Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge. For that, I read The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. The friends prompt was to buddy read a book with your buddy. My buddy was Michelle, and we buddy read Watching You by Lisa Jewell. Big Bang Theory was to read a book that your buddy recommended to you as a book that they thought that you would love. For that, I read The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, which I did really enjoy. Like I said, I gave that 4.5 stars. The next prompt was Sex and the City, for you to pick. This is one where you picked 4 books, and then your buddy picked which one that you would read. And I gave Michelle the next 4 standalone books that I had on my shelf, and for that one she actually picked Asking for It, and this was the book that she picked, and obviously I loved that book, so I gave it 5 stars. Talk to your buddy every day. We did do that. Michelle and I talked every day over Voxer. The next prompt was for girls to read a graphic novel, manga, or picture book. I read quite a few graphic novels throughout the month. I read Giant Days Volume 8, The Woods. I feel like there was maybe another one in there. I don't know. Anyway, I read a couple of ones, so I definitely checked that off. The next prompt was then the OC, to read a book with orange on the cover. For that, I read The Magic of Tiny Business. The next prompt was to shout out a book lover, which I did do over on my Twitter. The next prompt was for Will and Grace, to read a book with LGBT themes. For that, I used Wicked by Clover Donovan, as the main male character in that story is a gay character. And the final prompt for BookBuddyAthon was the prompt for Glee, which was to read a comfort read. And for that, I read The Giant Days novel by Non Pratt. So that's BookBuddyAthon. Very happy to have completed the entire bingo card. So now moving on to the other readathon that I was participating in April, which was the Owls Magical Readathon. So the idea of the Owls Readathon this year is that there were the 12 subjects with a prompt for each one. But the idea of it this year was that there was a career guide, and you could pick a career and try to complete the relevant subjects for that career. I had picked that I wanted to be a Hogwarts professor. And for that, you had to pick which class you wanted to teach, which I picked Charms, and you had to complete that class, Defense Against the Dark Arts, and 5 others. So there were 7 that I had to complete, but there were 12 challenges overall, which I was trying to complete all of them. So the first prompt was for Ancient Runes, to read a retelling. For that, I used Varys by Chandahan, which the main ones that we retold in that volume were Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. Then Arithmancy, to read a work written by more than one author. For that, I read The Girl Who Smiles Beads by Clementine Wamaria and Elizabeth Wheel. I just said that. Defense Against the Dark Arts, a title that starts with R. For that, I read The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. History of Magic, to read a book published at least 10 years ago. For that, I read The Giver by Lois Lowry. Transfiguration, to read a book with sprayed edges or red on the cover. For that, I read the Giant Days novel by Non Pratt. Charms, an Age Line, to read an adult book. I read a couple. The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. Herbology, plant on the cover. For that, I used the first Sweep bind-up that I read. I did read that entire bind-up in the month, and that had a vine on the cover. Astronomy, to read a book with star on the title. I read, what did I read for that? The Language of Stars by Louise Hawes. Care of Magical Creatures, to read a book with a land animal on the cover. For that, I read The Boy Swallows Universe by Trent Dalton. Muggle Studies, to read a contemporary. For that, I used Smoke and 17 by Janet Vanovich. Potions, Next Ingredient, to read a sequel. For that, you could use Giant Days Volume 8 or any of the 5 other sweep books that I read in the month after the first one. And then the last prompt was Divination, to read a book set in future, which I did not complete. So sadly, I missed one owl. I did still get the highest level, the outstanding that you can get for owls, which is great. I think you had to get 9 for that, and I obviously completed 11 of the 12. If you saw my vlog, then you know I was unsuccessful. I thought I got it, but I didn't. But I did still have an amazing time participating in these readathons this month. So that's it. That's my April wrap up. All of the books that I read, my statistics, the readathons. I would love to chat with you guys in the comments down below if you've got any thoughts on any of the books that I was reading, or if you guys were participating in readathons. I would love to chat with you. How did you guys do? Did you manage to complete them? I would love to know. Please like this video if you liked it. Please subscribe if you want to see more from my channel. That is all I have for this video today. Bye guys.